Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Opportunistic Trader. It's December 10th, and we're joined by Joe Vaclavik of the Standard Grain. Joe's been joining us regularly to talk about agriculture and opportunities that he's seeing and what's going on over there. So, Joe, how have things been lately?
It's been all right. We've seen a little bit of upward movement in the soybean market and in the corn market. The wheat market's been kind of the opposite. As I told you before we started here, I think we've got two big things going on here in the corn and soybean markets, at least. Your first thing I think is indisputably this situation with China. And our bean prices have been under pressure in general over the last several months because China is the world's largest bean buyer, and we've got a trade war going on with them, and they have bought essentially zero beans from the U.S. at a time of year, September, October, November, where they're usually massive buyers of U.S. soybeans. So that's been the big problem. And now what we're seeing here, we had that G20 meeting last Saturday, a little bit more than a week ago, and the market's bounced since then. It's been able to hold the gains. There was a story reported in Bloomberg and some of the other wires over the weekend that China is preparing to buy some soybeans from the U.S. They're going to buy some for state reserves, which should not be subject to the tariffs, and they may allow some commercials to buy soybeans from the U.S. and may provide some sort of waiver or something to offset the tariffs. So I'm not sure exactly how this is going to work out, but I do believe, just based on how the market trades, I think the market believes that this is going to happen, even though we have no actual evidence of it yet. The way the bean market's priced, the way that it's been able to hold the gains, I think it's trading as if we're going to see some Chinese business.
So, the reaction right now, we're trading in Jan beans just above $9. You get the sense that they are optimistic that there will be more trade with China over the coming days, weeks, and months?
Yeah, I do. I think it's going to happen sooner than that. I think it could be this week. I think it could be next week. I think it will probably be before the end of the year. And if it's not, then the soybean market's got problems and it's probably overpriced. I mean, you could even make the argument based on the balance sheets, and I don't want to get too technical here, but the carryout projections and the amount of beans that are projected to be left over at the end of the marketing year, which in the U.S. here is at the end of August, is going to be record high. Even if China does return and buy some bean, we're still going to have big problems in regard to our balance sheets and oversupply. So this isn't going to be a one-shop deal where we can just flip a switch and all of a sudden the bean market's better again. But China coming back and doing some business here in the next month or two would certainly help.
So, what percentage, do you know ballpark, what percentage of the beans that China buys from the U.S.?
Well, they buy I think it's a third of our total exports, or closer to half of our total exports. And then they've generally kind of been split between the U.S. and Brazil. And Brazil's the big competition here. I mean, that's where all of the business that normally goes to the U.S. has gone. It's gone to Brazil. So Brazil is doing record export business, and our export sales out of the U.S. in total are running, as of last Friday's report, we're 33% behind where we were last year in regard to exports sales, what's been booked for this marketing year. So that's a big deal. And at this point, USDA has most recently projected that we're only going to see a decline of 11% year over year. So even when you consider that USDA has reduced their projections for exports, they probably haven't gone far enough.
Any idea what the price of Brazilian soybeans have done this year?
So that is an interesting question, and it's an interesting answer too. So for the life of this trade war, for the most part, since we got hints of it in June, and then since the tariffs were actually placed on U.S. beans by China in July, I think it was first week in July, the Brazilian soybeans on the export market have held a steep premium to U.S. beans. As a matter of fact, throughout that whole time frame, the premium that the Brazilian beans had held had been just about equivalent to the tariff amount. It had been like a 25% premium, which is the tariff amount. So the cash market was very quick to figure out what the deal was. So Brazilian beans were basically, they were priced the same as if Chinese buyers would have bought them from the U.S. essentially. What's happened here recently is very interesting. That gap has narrowed, and as of Friday, I didn't calculate this, but they're only $20 a metric ton above us, which is in terms of percentage points, they're only like 4.5% above us on the export market. And that is the one thing that a lot of analysts said would happen if we saw a resolution to the trade war. So it's happening kind of as a precursor, I think, to these potential Chinese buys of U.S. beans. The premiums in Brazilian beans versus U.S. beans have just collapsed, and that's indicative of perhaps some business finally coming to the U.S.
Can a U.S. Speculator trade Brazilian soybeans?
I think you could. I don't know why you'd want to. I mean, these are cash prices I'm talking about. So they are. This is like what you're going to pay if you're an exporter and you're going to buy, an enormous amount of cash beans, and there's basis considerations and freight considerations and things like that. So yeah, they do have a futures market. I don't have anybody that does it. CME used to have a South American soybean contract and never gained any traction. So the U.S. futures is really the only way to do it.
Gotcha. I like your answer. You go, I don't know why anybody would want to do it. So USDA data coming out tomorrow. What's expected and what might be price action?
The December report, so this is the monthly crop production and WASDE report. The December report is historically not a big market mover compared to, say, some of the other reports like an acreage report or a quarterly stocks report. This December report is usually kind of a kick the can down the road deal until we start talking about next year's crop. But, this year's different in some respects. We've had some contra-seasonal adjustments to the U.S. crop. Everybody thought that the crops were going to get bigger, the corn and soybean crops, and then we saw some marginal declines the last couple of months. And the other thing, though, the wild card is this China thing. Is USDA going to come in tomorrow and again reduce their export projection, or are they going to wait and see if China comes back to the bean market and wait till January or February to make those adjustments? So there's some uncertainty here. I mean, there definitely is, but I mean, this report again is generally not one historically that's associated with a ton of volatility.
Gotcha. I heard overnight that there was a large Mexican buyer of U.S. corn. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mexico bought a ton of corn. They've been doing this kind of seasonal purchase for a few consecutive years now. So it shouldn't be a huge surprise. Our corn is the cheapest feed grain available on the world market. U.S. corn is. So, I mean, it's no surprise to me that we're seeing demand for it. I mean, the fact that we saw, 1.6 million metric tons in one day. I mean, yeah, that's a little surprising. That doesn't happen all the time. But it's good, and we need the demand, and it's not totally surprising because our prices are very competitive.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I saw it seemed like a very sizable corn buy, but the price.
Yeah, that's a huge sale. That's about as big as you'll ever see on a daily report. I mean, that's about as good as they get historically speaking.
Yeah, but I just noticed futures pricing really hasn't done anything. So
yeah, I mean, in a lot of situations they don't. Exports are tough to trade unless you see like something really out of the ordinary, like this China thing would be not a surprise when and if it's printed, but the amount will be interesting, and the trade might get a little bit more excited about that. I mean, it's not very often that you see it one individual export sale account for a big move in the market. And in fact, it's probably, if you're a trader, you're probably better served to fade the exports more than anything. Meaning that if they print a really good number, you sell the market. If they print a really bad number, you buy the market. That's probably if I was a trader, that's probably what I would look to do because I've seen it work successfully in the past.
Gotcha. Now, so we've the USDA data tomorrow, which you're not expecting to be a huge mover. So it's really all eyes on China then for any progress there. And then I guess it goes for the beginning of the year as well. I guess if there's no new news from China, even let's call it over the next 6 weeks, let's even call it, where do you think the price action in corn, wheat, soy is?
Well, if you don't get those Chinese purchases confirmed soon, the downside risk is in the soybean market. I mean, there's a lot of downside risk in my opinion if something doesn't change on the demand front. I mean, they could take $1 off the soybean market real easily if this thing doesn't develop. And even if it does develop, I think there's still downside risk because I'm not sure how the final export number is going to compare with what's projected right now. I just think the projections are too high, and that even if China does come back, USDA might still have to cut their projections. So we may still very well be sitting in a soybean market that's overpriced, and we could sit here for a little while while these Chinese rumors are floating around, and then it's going to depend on what does China ultimately buy.
Yeah. All right. You know what? Actually, before I let you go, I had one question coming in. We always put your picture up of your website and you, and somebody was asking, who's the guy in the cornfield holding the stalk of corn on your website?
I didn't make the website, so he's probably some guy who's not a real farmer. Would be my guess. He's probably a stock image. Would be my guess.
Gotcha. Good looking guy over there. Somebody who's asking.
I didn't want to put my picture up there, so
resembles you a little bit. Somebody has to. You got to do a double take to figure out that it's not you.
No, but, definitely not me.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, Joe Vaclavik, Standard Grain, a lot of great information. I really appreciate it. We'll keep a close eye on the ag market. If something breaks, let us know in the chat. But we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. See you later.
All right. Thanks, Joe.